This tank is a huge disaster and I can't keep it running any longer. But how did we even end up here? Well, to get the full story, we first have to rewind back to October of 2024. Back then I was keeping my isopods in this plastic bin, but I wasn't very successful keeping them alive. Oh man, this is all dried out. Now as you can tell, they're pretty far out of sight and therefore, I hate to admit it, but also kind of out of mind. The obvious solution here is to make something that looks nice, so I won't mind having it around and won't forget to take care of it. So I went down to the woods looking for inspiration. I love walking through the woods and it didn't take long to find something I could work with. These fallen trees show that even in the face of death, nature finds a way to thrive. And from this fallen log, a new mini ecosystem can emerge. By peeling away some bark, you can find various little critters, including the isopod. And so, the idea was born. I went back home and began constructing a custom tank. I have a lot of scrap pieces of glass laying around that I'd like to start using. Now you've seen me make custom tanks before and it's pretty straightforward. Once cut the size, I siliconed everything together. The next day I came back to address ventilation. I left an open strip along the top that I'll cover from the inside with some window screen. Once taped in place, I covered the edges with some silicone and left it to cure. Next, I began working on the background. For this I wanted to use a scrap piece of towel I had laying around. I smashed it up into smaller pieces, shuffled them around and began adding them to the tank. I want to create a rocky wall with moss growing through all of the cracks. Once I found something I liked, I attached all the pieces to the back with more silicone. We're almost ready to start scaping the tank. I just need to install the glass tracks. And this right here is my first time using glass tracks on a build. Now, the glass down here is in front of the side pieces, where it should actually be inside the side pieces. And I even made sure that the glass up here sticks out just as much as the bottom panel. So it's nice and level, but it's wrong. It should actually be inside the side panel, so that's a little mistake on my end. But I came up with a solution that I think looks pretty good. I used a few pieces of scrap PVC board. I measured a few things, I glued them together, I carved them down, and I attached them to the tank itself. And now we have a nice black border around the whole thing. This wasn't how I planned everything out, but I think it might even look better than if I did everything correctly. So that's pretty nice. And after all of that, we're now left with a really good looking custom-made tank that will hopefully perfectly hold our piece of cork. Now up to this point, excluding a few details, pretty much the entire tank has been made using scrap materials. And I like to keep that theme going, so I'm gonna use some scrap pieces of EVA foam to support this tank at the bottom. Next, I began adding some gravel to act as our false bottom. On top of that will be our substrate barrier. And on top of that will be the substrate. Next, I added damp sphagnum moss between all the cracks in the stones. I'll be adding moss here in a second, but first I want to start building up the landscape. Now it's time to start adding some moss to this. And of course we should also add a fern. And you know what? Why not also add some Photonia? Leaf litter is also a must in a build like this. Adding some small pine cones and acorns also help build the forest aesthetic. I loved adding these details so much that I almost forgot to add moss to the background. Now I think that's looking pretty awesome, so let's add the doors and move it over to the stand. From here the tank did pretty decent for quite some time, and if I'm being completely honest, the only failed aspect of this tank is the moss, which I kind of expected. From what I read online, these taller species often are a bit more difficult to keep alive. Now lately I've also been switching a lot of things up in the animal room and decided that a couple of my terrariums definitely need to go. And that's where these tanks come in. Now I've been thinking about breaking these down for quite a long time. They all suffer from pretty bad visibility. Some plants died off, other plants are taking over. There's a lot of algae growing in some of them. You know, they all have their little things, nothing detrimental to the system, but it does take away from the looks of them. So the plan is to open up all of these tanks, take out the plants that I want to reuse, take out the soil I want to reuse, and then just dump the rest. And then we'll have 4 empty tanks that I may or may not scape again in the future. But more importantly, we have a lot of material that we can use to revive the isopod tank. So let's get to work. I use these 3 containers to separate the plants I want to reuse, the soil, and anything I want to throw away. All pretty straightforward until I try to remove this piece of driftwood. It had roots running through the soil and into the drainage layer, making it hard to remove without spilling everything out. Anyway, with the old tanks out of the way, it's time to get the isopod tank. It has clearly seen better days, but the final straw for this tank definitely was when I needed to borrow the cord for the Sunken Forest aquascape. So, fun little story, when I set this thing up I wanted to stock it with orange powder isopods, which are very common and not very expensive, but for some reason I was dead set on getting the best possible deal for the isopods. So I went online and I was searching a couple of different stores and comparing their prices, and eventually I landed on a store that was undercutting the second best price by about half. And just for your imagination, like most stores have a colony of these isopods set for €2, and then there was one that had one for €1, and then eventually I found a store that was selling them for 50 cents. And I thought, wow, that's a great deal. In hindsight, I don't know why I wanted to desperately save €1.50 or even 50 cents, but that's beside the point. I was dead set on getting the cheapest ones, and then I ordered them, and then they arrived. And what do you know? I did not order 2 colonies. No, apparently the very cheap store was actually very expensive, because the 50 cents was not for an entire colony, as they're usually sold, but instead for just singular isopods. So instead of buying 2 colonies, I bought 2 singular isopods. Yeah, that was not my brightest moment, but it all turned out fine, because in this tank right now there are hundreds of isopods, so it's all fine. But I don't know, enjoy the video. Anyway, I think the easiest way to go about this is to do the remodeling of this tank while the isopods are still in there. So that's what we're gonna do. And I really like the overgrown fern here. It kind of puts us in the isopods perspective, like we're on the 4th floor with all the plants growing over us. So I decided to lean into that feeling and build up some soil and place another fern so it would mimic that feeling. Next, I added various sticks and stones to build up a forest floor. All of the leftover plants got added as well, and the only new element I added to this setup is some moss from my garden. And obviously no forest floor is complete without some leaf litter. And that's pretty much it. Now I really like the first design I did for these isopods, but I think I might like this one even better. Let me know in the comments which one was your favorite. And if you're hungry for more content, I recommend you watch this video next. I'll see you there.